And at number 10, organic webs. Tobey Maguire's iteration of Spider-Man was extremely accurate to the comic source material, but one of the few differences between the two was his version of Spider-Man's web shooters. For most of Spider-Man's nearly 60 years of existence in comic books and various adaptations, the superhero used a pair of wrist-mounted shooters that shoot a synthetic web-like fluid. While most Spider-Man adaptations retain the iconic mechanical web shooters, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy opted to give its version of Peter Parker the power to generate webbing from his body. When you really think about it, it is really gross. It was even a joke made in the latest Spider-Man movie when the Andrew Garfield and Tom Holland versions of the characters are flabbergasted and slightly grossed out by Tobey Maguire's organic sticky spider webbing that came propelling out of this weird scar on his wrist. Maybe I'm weird, but I kinda like the organic webbing? I don't know, maybe because I grew up on the Raimi films, it felt right, and the reason for Raimi doing it makes sense to me. I'm sorry.
Number 9, from rags to riches and back to rags again. One of the weirdest things that happened to Peter in regards to no one seemingly really acknowledging or remembering it much in the continuity is when Peter became basically a globe-trotting billionaire all his own, in a similar but distinctly different style to Iron Man's Tony Stark. Well, of course, initially it was Otto in Peter's body who created Parker Industries and made it a success, but still, even without Otto in the driver's seat, it makes sense when you think about it, as Peter is a brilliant man who, if he had the time and he put in the effort, could easily end up near the top of the Fortune 500. However, what is weird is that he created a global company that was extremely profitable and successful for a time, lost it, and then everyone seemingly forgot who he was. He ended up back as just poor Peter Parker, just trying to get by while playing the role of hero. And everyday folks don't seem to even recognize him as the face of a once great global company. That's pretty nuts.
Number 8. Getting beat up by the Spot. Jonathan Owen is a villain that only well-versed fans of Spider-Man would recognize, probably. As the Spot, Jonathan hasn't always been the most relevant villain of Peter Parker. He often ends up on the list of Spider-Man's worst and unknown villains. I mean, when he first confronted Spider-Man and announced his villain moniker in Peter Parker the Spectacular Spider-Man Volume 1, Issue 99 in 1985, the hero hit the ground laughing, which made it all the more embarrassing for Spider-Man when the Spot actually defeated him. Spot threw Peter in and out of his dimensions using his whole portals. He landed more than a few good punches on the hero as well. The Spot doesn't hit hard, but as he says, even the strongest of trees can be felled by sufficient strokes from even the smallest of hatchets. Yeah, he said that. Eventually, he left Peter discombobulated, with Black Cat having to help him back to his feet, and he got his own back eventually, but that's not important.
Number 7. Everyone loves MJ. An awkward moment in the Ultimate Spider-Man universe comes courtesy of Ultimate Peter Parker getting his own version of the Clone Saga. Except here, instead of Ben Reilly and Kane Parker, we got Kane Parker and Jessica Drew. That's right, in the Ultimate universe, Jessica Drew is actually a female clone of Peter Parker. There were some other clones too, just for those of you that are like, you didn't mention all the other clones. But yes, I know about them. They exist. And even more intriguing and also kind of sad in this reality, Jessica and all the other clones have all of Peter's memories, which leads to pretty much all of them having a huge crush on MJ. Jessica included. Although in an even stranger twist, despite also being in love with Mary Jane, or seemingly being in love with Mary Jane, instead of Jessica ending up as a lesbian in this portrayal of her character as a result of sharing Peter's memories and feelings, it is implied that she actually ends up dating Johnny Storm, albeit possibly briefly. Although I think that also could say something about the potential for the close relationship that Johnny and Peter have in the comics, so maybe that's what that's about.
Number 6. Spider-Man and Silk getting busy on the ceiling. Cindy Moon, first revealed in The Amazing Spider-Man #1 from 2014, was a girl who on the same day was also bitten by the exact same spider that gave Peter Parker his powers. Now fast forward to the 4th issue of that comic and Peter learns of her existence and the place she was being kept safe. He releases her and joins her as she goes off into the world. Now it took about 5 or 6 pages before it was revealed that these two young spider heroes release pheromones that make them irresistibly attracted to one another, and they nearly immediately start going at it. Mid-argument. They go at it so much so that it carries on into the next issue when he and Cindy Moon are on the ceiling of the apartment that Peter shares with his roommate Anna Maria Marconi. So of course Anna Maria walks in on the two spider freaks sparsely clothed and unable to control themselves. Not an ideal situation.
Number 5. Aunt May forgets to knock. Speaking on people walking in on people. Later on in their comic book history, MJ and Peter wouldn't just be friends or even dating, they would actually end up married for quite a long while. However, just because they were married didn't mean that Aunt May always remembered to respect their privacy and knock when they were alone together in a bedroom. Case in point in Web of Spider-Man issue number 50, when she decides to bring them up some warm hot cocoa to warm their bones on a cold winter's night, only to find out that they are already busy warming their bones.
Number 4. Miles getting Gwen's hair stuck on his hand. If you haven't seen the totally awesome and award-winning animated Into the Spider-Verse film, well, pause this video and go do that and then come back. But if you have, then you surely remember the scene not too long after Miles Morales discovers he has powers and winds up in an extremely embarrassing situation with Gwen Stacy, his crush. You see, Miles' uncle told him to try this totally slick move on his crush where he puts his hand on her shoulder and be like, "Hey." Which, I don't know where you go after you say the "hey" thing. It kind of feels like terrible advice, and I think it was because Miles just did it in the middle of a conversation and made it really bad. But then, thanks to his new powers, when he goes to remove his hand, he accidentally gets stuck to her hair. The next 30 seconds sees him accidentally pull her in close, get stuck to her textbook, spin around, blame it on puberty, and then get catapulted by her, all in front of other students. She ends up getting half her hair buzzed off, which, hey, it's an experience neither of them will forget. Maybe when they're married they'll laugh about it, I don't know, maybe not.
Number 3. Spider-Man loses control. One of the most awkward moments in terms of just what went down has to be when Spider-Man accidentally hits MJ when she's trying to get between Peter and his clone Ben Reilly to stop them from fighting one another. Oddly enough, I was remembering a thing where this also appeared. Even though this moment was very different in terms of what caused it to happen, a very similar incident also is incorporated into the original Sam Raimi Spider-Man film franchise. In this case, MJ tries to stop Peter from beating up on a bouncer at the nightclub that she works at. In the comics, Peter and Ben both go to run some tests to figure out who is the clone and who is the original between them, when Peter learns that Ben is supposedly the original, and he freaks out. He begins wailing on Ben, and Mary Jane breaks free to attempt to break up the fight, calling out to her husband, "Stop it, Peter, for the love of God! Stop, you're killing him!" Instinctively, Peter goes to push MJ back, telling her to get away and leave him alone, and he strikes her, sending her flying with his super strength, only for him to realize what he's done almost immediately, condemning his own behavior before running away. In Spider-Man 3, it goes down similarly, with Peter running away even following this encounter, and MJ calling out, "Peter, stop it," which is also very similar.
Number 2. Spider-Web underwear. In The Amazing Spider-Man from 2014, after Spider-Man had a bit of a body swap with a certain villain, he got into a fight that had all of his costume, minus his mask, zapped off. Like, all of it, down to his birthday suit. As a quick solution to the problem, Spider-Man decided to use his webbing to cover up his privates as an honestly genius decision. Well, it would have been genius, but see, Peter didn't realize that the villain he mind swapped with actually improved his webbing so it now lasts much longer, which meant Peter now had some permanent underwear for a while. So not only did Spider-Man have a costume consisting of a mask and web undies that was seen all over live television, prompting many characters to laugh at him, and even gave Jessica Drew a clue that this was Peter Parker back in his body again, he also had to explain this whole thing in one long monologue to Captain America of all people. Oh, Peter, you never cease to amaze.
Number 1. Trapped in Dr. Octopus's mind. At one point in the comics, we get the awesome weirdness that is Superior Spider-Man, which is basically when Otto Octavius, aka Dr. Octopus, takes hold of Spider-Man's body. However, this happens as the result of a body swap, which Peter is tricked into, which means that Peter Parker, aka Spider-Man, has his consciousness end up in the failing body of Otto Octavius, who at that time was dying. While trapped in Otto's mind, Peter ends up reliving some of Otto's memories, namely an extremely intimate and weirdly romantic moment that happened between Otto and Aunt May when the two were engaged to be married. Although they never ended up married, apparently they still sealed the deal, if you know what I mean. Which means that Peter got a front row seat to an intimate interaction that he'd rather have never known happened. And you know, he's in Otto's body in that memory, so. Number 10. Captain America. Or a version of Captain America, at least. This version of Captain America betrayed a whole bunch of superheroes and pretty much all of the civilians of the United States of America. That's right, we're talking about Hydra Cap, who technically now is an alternate, but at the time of reveal was sold as being a longtime sleeper agent of Hydra in the main continuity, changing pretty much everything we thought we knew about that character's origin. In reality, Captain America was simply altered by the Cosmic Cube, and the real version of him from the main continuity still existed within the cube, or shards of the cube itself. He was technically changed by a version of the Cosmic Cube that was a person who was named Kobik, but anyways. Peter himself actually also lost his company, Parker Industries, as a result of Hydra Cap's takeover. To keep his various offices around the globe from falling into Hydra's hands, Peter had to basically run them all into the ground, essentially destroying everything he had built. If that isn't a betrayal, I don't know what is. And it's Captain America! Shocking. But not really, because it's Hydra Cap. Like I said, alternate reality. Whatever. Number 9. Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange is another hero who kinda accidentally, I suppose, betrayed Spider-Man. While in the comics, Strange recently saw Peter as his champion in a fight between Strange and Mephisto, in the MCU, Strange tried to help Peter out with the fact that he and his friends all seemingly got rejected from the colleges they'd applied to because of his identity being revealed to the world. Doctor Strange decided to use a spell that would make the world forget that Peter Parker was Spider-Man, even though it was also against the new Sorcerer Supreme, Wong's, wishes and his recommendations. Now, granted, Steven did mean to help Peter here, he wasn't like intentionally betraying him, but in the end everything went kinda haywire, mainly due to Peter, who kept trying to change the parameters of the spell as Strange was mid-casting it. But this isn't really how Strange betrayed Peter anyways. It was more afterward, when other villains from across the multiverse ended up appearing in the current reality, and Spider-Man wanted to try to help them as opposed to just banishing them after finding out they were all pretty much fated to die, which Strange had kind of seemingly known about but just didn't really care about. Strange had told Peter to round them up, but withheld that important information about their fate, which to me was a pretty major betrayal. Like, these are people from the Spider-Verse, I feel like you should at least tell Peter what he's doing and what kind of fate he's condemning these people to if he sends them back. And of course this revelation only led to another betrayal in kind when Peter decided to release these villains, helping them escape Strange in an effort to actually fix them. What can I say? You betray someone and then they're probably gonna betray you back. That's how it goes. Number 8. Boomerang. Okay, so Boomerang isn't really a hero. He's more of a villain than anything, but for a moment there he was leaning in the direction of being a hero at least, and I think because of that we can give him a spot on this list. Boomerang is known for being a member of the Sinister Syndicate and ended up getting roped into Sinister War. Before he was battling it out with all the other Sinister teams though, he was actually almost Peter and Spider-Man's ally and friend at one point. In fact, I would say he was Peter and Spider-Man's ally and friend, and roommate. Okay, so in reality Boomerang was just using him to get help collecting pieces of a tablet that he wanted, but that's where the betrayal part comes in. When Fred Myers applied to be Peter Parker's roommate due to Myers' reputation, Parker really wasn't feeling it. He wasn't so sure, but he did decide ultimately to give Myers a chance after he kinda helped him out and kinda saved his life. And when he did, he was happily surprised. The two became friends, and Boomerang even showed promise as Spider-Man's ally and a potential hero in his own right. In the end, however, once the tablet was acquired, Boomerang revealed his true colors, and admitted that this was kind of his plan the whole time. But he also admitted he did feel bad for betraying Spider-Man in a letter that he left him. Myers actually felt so bad he ended up helping Spider-Man out at one point during Sinister War, helping him to hide from the others for a time. Aw, so cute. Also, I just really like this story, so I was like, I could talk about this on this list. And I got excited, and here we are. Number 7. Fantastic Four. When Spider-Man was just starting out, the Fantastic Four were among those to betray him. I know, shocking. Spider-Man went to them looking for help supporting his Aunt May and himself. You see, back in those days, and kind of in general with Spider-Man and his comics, money was tight, and Spider-Man was trying to find a way that he could use his talents and his abilities to help pay the bills. He was hoping to join the FF, who he assumed must have a salary wage as superheroes that would be reasonable in amount due to them, you know, saving the world all the time. Unfortunately, that was not the case. He broke into the Baxter Building in an attempt to impress the family of amazing superheroes, only to find out that they were a non-profit organization and they didn't really get paid to do what they did. And even if they had space on the team and could afford to pay Spidey, they claimed initially they wouldn't really want him. Ouch. Spider-Man at the time was considered an outlaw by the press and police, and they didn't want to be affiliated with him even. Harsh. Of course, that's all water under the bridge now, and Spider-Man has actually been a member of the FF's Future Foundation and is actually on the extended or backup roster for the Fantastic Four team. So it all worked out in the end, but in the early days, it was a pretty harsh betrayal. Number 6, Morbius. Morbius and Spider-Man have had a complicated history. Sometimes they're allies, sometimes they're foes. Morbius himself also has had a complex history. Sometimes he's a hero, sometimes a villain, sometimes he's a little more somewhere in between those two. Case in point, when he resurfaced after seemingly being cured of his vampirism by a bolt of lightning. I kid you not, that is what happened in the comics. This stuck for quite a while, but eventually Morbius's hunger and his thirst for human blood returned. He attempted to reach out to a doctor at Empire State University for help, but instead ran into Spider-Man, who didn't trust him. It turned out that he was in earnest trying to figure out what was going on and fix it, but the doctor he wanted help from turned out to be an ally of Hydra. She kidnapped Morbius, and when Spider-Man came to free him, things quickly went kind of crazy. Instead of teaming up with Spider-Man and showing gratitude for this rescue, Morbius attacked his captors, and then when Spider-Man intervened in that attack, attacked him instead, draining him of blood and inadvertently turning Spider-Man into a vampire-like creature himself for a while, who was known as Hunger. Also, I know there's gonna be people that are gonna be like, Amanda, Morbius does not want blood. He just wants plasma, Amanda. It's just all about the plasma. Look, the plasma's from the cartoon, okay guys? And they had to say plasma because they couldn't say blood because it's a kid's show. So fun fact. Although plasma is important as well. You can donate plasma and you can donate blood. There's lots of cool things you can donate. You should check that out and go save someone's life today. This just became a PSA from Amanda McKnight. Can you tell that I donate blood? I feel like you can. Number 5, Spider-Man. Although typically this hero is often known by the name Scarlet Spider. That is right, we are talking about the hero and Spider-Man clone, Ben Reilly. Currently in the comics, Ben is the Spider-Man, or a Spider-Man, currently roaming New York City. He is the Spider-Man of choice by Corporation Beyond, who is looking to get into the business of superheroes, apparently. They acquired the right to the Spider-Man name, and as such, Ben actually asks, or kind of more tells Peter, that he can't be Spider-Man anymore, or at least he can't use that name. He does ask for his blessing as well out of respect. He's not trying to be a jerk here, but it's obvious that Peter is hurt by this revelation, as he already seems to be suffering from a bit of like an identity crisis perhaps, which is also pretty interesting because I feel like so is Ben at this point. Number 4, Wolverine. Oh boy, Wolverine and Spider-Man aren't always two heroes who see eye to eye, and we've seen them butt heads a few times, despite both being heroes and even at times teammates. I would say one of the things that has come up the most when it comes to Wolverine potentially betraying Peter has to do with one of his biggest love interests in the comics. Yep, we are talking about Mary Jane Watson. In the Ultimate Comics, the two heroes body swapped, and Wolverine in Peter's body attempted to put some major moves on Mary Jane, and in the main continuity, Wolverine once insulted their relationship, causing Peter to throw him through the window of a building. A seemingly impenetrable, bulletproof window too. Just FYI. That is how upset Peter was about the remark. Number 3, Black Cat. Black Cat is another hero who has betrayed Peter in the past. And to those of you focusing on her more criminal and villainous past, yes, Felicia Hardy is not a saint, but I would argue that now, currently in the comics, she is more a hero than a villain. Also, she recently just like worked with Captain America, and I feel like if you're doing that, you gotta be pretty good, right? Captain America doesn't really work with villains usually. I think at least we can give her an anti-hero status. She betrayed Spider years ago, but has also betrayed him more than once when she ended up going behind his back to get herself some superpowers. She did this because she knew Spider-Man was worried for her safety, and she wanted to be able to keep up with him and help him, you know, to not worry about her. Unfortunately, she turned to Kingpin to get said powers, and they ended up being bad luck probability-based powers, so she really only ended up hurting Spider-Man a lot in the end. Especially when he kind of realized that something was up with her and that she was keeping secrets. Not a good look. Not a good look, Felicia. Number 2, Spider-Man. What is worse than having your lover betray you? How about you betraying yourself? Yes, I know we've already talked about Spider-Man on this list, but now we are here to talk about the other Spider-Man, the original Spider-Man, in comparison to his clones at least, Peter Parker. Peter might do everything he can to save the world and make New York a safer place, but at the end of the day, there is one enemy he really can't defeat: himself. After all, Spider-Man is probably one of the most guilt-ridden superheroes of all time, always feeling like he is responsible for the death of those that he loves. He doesn't just feel as though he's betrayed himself and those he cares about as a hero, but he also therefore betrays and often sabotages his own happiness because of this, believing sometimes that he doesn't actually even deserve to be happy. It's pretty tragic stuff. Also, it's not always your fault, Peter. Sometimes bad things just happen, you know? Like, you can't control everything in life, you just gotta accept it. Peter needs more therapy, that's what I think. Number 1. Iron Man. Iron Man is probably one of the characters most well known for betraying Spider-Man on this list, even though what he did to actually betray him is somewhat debatable in terms of it being considered, you know, like a one-for-one betrayal. Iron Man encouraged Peter to join him and support the Superhero Registration Act. Spider-Man happened to be such a big fan and friend of Tony's that he agreed to do so and even unmasked for Tony Stark during a televised public statement. However, later on, this would come back to bite Peter in the butt when he and his family ended up being targeted by criminals who wanted Spider-Man dead. Surprise, surprise. Aunt May ended up in the hospital as a result of a targeted attack, and eventually this whole debacle would also lead to Spider-Man losing his marriage to Mary Jane when the pair made a deal with Mephisto in order to save Aunt May's life. There is even a what if focused around what would happen if Mary Jane was the one to be killed, where Peter specifically blames Iron Man for basically everything bad that has happened to him up till this point. Well, not everything, but everything surrounding this. Also, he realized what was going to go on with Iron Man wanting to use like the negative zone kind of as like a prison, found out that, and then he was like, I'm really not about this. And then even then, they chased Spider-Man down. Although I believe Iron Man was kind of like, guys, let's just talk to Spider-Man, let's not be weird about this. But at that point it was too late. Iron Man really had no control and it had gotten out of hand. That's what had happened. Civil War I, baby. Number 10. Captain Marvel. I can't deny, I actually kind of like this ship, but it still feels pretty out of left field, especially if you're more of a cinematic Marvel fan, and that's where a lot of your knowledge comes from. And even if you're not, while there has been quite a bit of flirting between the two in the comics, I would have never expected either hero to actually act on those flirtations and possible feelings. Anyways, Carol basically had a bit of a crush on Spidey, which has come up multiple times in the past, and both were close friends due to their time working side by side on the Avengers. While Carol herself tends to be a bit more serious and Peter is a bit more silly, the two have some pretty adorable interactions, and they also have a lot of strong mutual respect, which is what it's all about when it comes to romance, baby. They went on a date back when Carol was still operating under her Miss Marvel mantle, but her crush has also come up a few times since then. Spider-Man bartered to get that initial date with her in exchange for basically his superhero help. The date was awkward, but it ended on a not so bad note when both heroes kind of realized they were just working way too hard to impress the other person instead of just being themselves, which is also what romance should be all about, just being yourselves. Also, I like that I did this when I was talking about people having mutual respect. Like, this is fighting. I don't know why I did this, but you know, mutual respect. So we did see them go on that one date, however, we have not seen them date since, even though it went pretty well by the end of it. Number 9. Deadpool. Okay, so this one isn't an official romance, more of a bromance, but it's shipped enough by people that we could consider it a fan-based pseudo-romance, which, yeah, is a thing I just made up now, so that's a thing now. Fan-based pseudo-romances. That's a term. Basically, Deadpool is borderline in love and obsessed with Spider-Man. It's pretty one-sided for the most part, but the two do have their moments, and there are times when Deadpool even inspires Spider-Man, or at least makes Peter consider Deadpool's maybe not as terrible and as annoying as he originally thought. The two have helped each other out multiple times and even have a whole team-up series together, and it lasted 3 years. It's pretty bromantic. Number 8. Mary Jane Watson. For this Spider-Man, we're not talking about Peter Parker, obviously. I'm not trying to argue that their relationship is weird, because, you know, it's been going on for a long time. Although at times, that relationship between Peter Parker and MJ definitely can be weird, I would argue. I'm actually talking about here the relationship between the Scarlet Spider and Mary Jane Watson, Ben Reilly, who for a time was also known as Spider-Man. While we don't actually see how their romance plays out in the alternate world belonging to Universe X, it is implied that the two had a daughter together there who grows up to become Spider-Girl. It's never explained how this came about, but the idea of Mary Jane ending up and settling down with Ben Reilly makes me wonder what happened to Peter in this alternate universe. Or is it possible that initially Mary Jane thought this was Peter, with Ben being himself a clone of Parker? I have so many questions. Number 7. Ultimate Katie Bishop. This weird romance belongs to the Spider-Man known as Miles Morales. What's the deal with this relationship? Well, in the Ultimate Universe of 1610, Kate Bishop is not like the one we have in Earth 616. She isn't Hawkeye's apprentice, nor does she become Hawkeye in this reality. Instead, we learn she is dating Miles Morales and is just a normal student. Or so it seems. In reality, her parents are Hydra agents who sedate Miles when he visits and then kidnap him and experiment on him, alongside Dr. Doom. Ultimate Dr. Doom. Fortunately, he does manage to escape and of course decides to break up with Katie before leaving. Gotta love those extreme ultimate romances. So weird. I also like that Miles was like, yeah, so you guys like kidnapped me and experimented on me, so I think I'm just gonna like break up? I think I'm just gonna break up with you, but this was weird. Thanks. It's like a weird way to end your relationship. Number 6. Jackpot. With Jackpot, it's all pretty confusing because we have Sarah Earhart, the real superpowered Jackpot, and Alana Jobson, who is posing as Jackpot and uses drugs to give herself powers so she can become a hero. Here we are mostly talking about Alana Jobson. Alana Jobson, who is posing as Jackpot. While Alana herself is implied as being attracted to Sarah, when posing as Jackpot and fighting alongside Spider-Man, he initially thinks that she might be his ex-girlfriend Mary Jane. The two of them have a few flirty moments while fighting together. Jackpot even calls him Tiger, considering the name of her character is obviously meant to be a play on Mary Jane's famous catchphrase, "You just hit the jackpot, Tiger." This is also what compels Spider-Man to want to learn more about the new superhero. In reality, Alana Jobson is paying Sarah to use her superhero identity and registration papers, because she just really wants to be a hero. She ends up dying as a result of this desire when the superpower-inducing drugs and hormones she uses together end up killing her when mixed with a blindness serum, despite Spider-Man successfully giving her the antidote to said serum. This romance never really goes anywhere, it just ends in tragedy. Number 6. Emma Frost. This one is pretty strange, but it's also coming at us from an alternate reality, so you know, you kinda just gotta go with it. I think what really shocked me about it though is that Kitty Pryde and Peter Parker were also known to date in the Ultimate Universe, and so I've always kind of thought of Kitty as being, you know, quite younger than Emma, and that was the thing that made me go like, wait, what? So how old? What's happening? So I was just confused in general by that logic, although this is comics, so while in some realities characters may have a greater age gap, in others they may actually be the exact same age, closing that gap completely. And in this comic, that is what is happening. In Marvel Adventures Spider-Man, which takes place in the alternate reality of Earth 20051, both Emma Frost and her BFF Shat Sandoval had a crush on Spidey, and Emma Frost is the same age as him here, so it's not weird. It's a little weird, but it's not weird. Emma, being a telepath, used her powers to uncover his secret identity, and she causes a bit of trouble when Chad and Peter start dating. Eventually, her trickery, however, is exposed, and she's forced to face the consequences of her actions. Here, Emma Frost is known by the codename Silencer, and ends up becoming an ally to both Chad and Spider-Man later on. Number 4. Black Widow. The strange thing is, while this happened in Marvel Team Up issue number 82, as a quick little thing, when Black Widow loses her memory temporarily, it also has been a comic ship in an alternate world where there is an amalgam alternate version of Black Widow who is basically a blend of both Black Widow and Black Cat, which yes, is one of the coolest alternates for both Black Cat and Black Widow. I know, it's pretty great. The issue where these two, however, initially hook up comes to us from way back before that. How it ends up happening is Spider-Man saves the day for Black Widow, who at the time believes she is a school teacher named Nancy Rushman. The other weird thing is that Natasha has also lost her memories of who she is, but has managed to retain her fighting know-how, and also assists Spider-Man with apprehending criminals, not thinking that it is weird at all for her to be doing. But, you know, I guess the fighting know-how maybe is in her physical memory? I don't know how that all works, but brains, stuff, wiring. physical memory? Spider-Man recognizes her and recognizes that her being enamored with him is admittedly pretty weird, as is the fact that she thinks she is a woman named Nancy Rushman when she's not. Once her memories are back, Black Widow is over the flirtation and basically just dips at the end of the issue. She's like, this was cool, but also not into you. Bye. Only me as Nancy Rushman was into you, Spider-Man, sorry about that. Number 3. Spider-Woman. While this isn't an official thing that has happened as of yet, we have gotten quite a few flirty moments between Spider-Man and Jessica Drew from Brian Michael Bendis' run on the Avengers. They weren't full-on shipped, but there was definitely some suggestive light shipping happening there. At one point when they are teamed up, Jessica even scans Spider-Man to make sure he's not a Skrull, just because she finds him to be so strange. His response was to ask if they were on a date. I guess he's just used to women calling him weird on dates, which kind of makes sense because Peter Parker is pretty awkward and weird. Fair enough. Number 2. Silk. One of the strangest romances that Peter has ever had is with another one of the Spider folks, Silk, Cindy Moon. Apparently they were both bit by the same radioactive spider, which is why they believe they are so irresistibly infatuated with one another. Either that or they just are inexplicably attracted to each other. The whole fact that they don't seem to have control of their physical urge to be together makes this relationship one of the weirdest that Peter has ever had, and kind of one of the most uncomfortable in my opinion, especially as even when they're in danger they just feel the urge to just get physical instead of, dealing with the problem at hand. Like, their attraction to one another not only seems to be completely uncontrollable, but it can also potentially endanger innocent lives, or their own lives even. Number 1. Marrow. Yep, probably one of the weirdest relationships that's happened out there for Peter Parker. There was a random time that he briefly dated Marrow. Why? Well, I don't know, cause comics. These two dated very briefly and even had a team-up one-shot titled Spider-Man Marrow in the early 2000s, which delved into their brief relationship and Marrow's change in personality. Their relationship ended after Marrow realized she wasn't really herself, as she was being brainwashed and used by S.H.I.E.L.D. to hunt down life model decoys. After she regained her memories, she escaped S.H.I.E.L.D., but the two ultimately broke up because she hadn't quite been herself basically throughout their relationship, so that'll do it. Oh, also she was a student at ESU where Peter was guest lecturing as a grad student, and Sarah refers to him multiple times in this issue as Mr. Parker, which I cannot deny I found quite a bit creepy. If you're calling your partner Mr. something, I don't know about that. Seems weird. Maybe that's just me. Number 10. Mockingbird. This wasn't a weird pairing because it was so much really bad or anything, it was just more weird because it was pretty random. Although these two had some fun moments, most fans felt that there just wasn't much staying power between them. Also, Spider-Man is a major jokester and Mockingbird seemed to actively dislike laughing at Peter's jokes. She's pretty no nonsense. The nice thing is that Peter didn't have to worry about Bobby when it came to her being strong, independent, and being able to take on any baddies who might come her way because of her attachment to Spider-Man. In the end, however, everyone kind of felt the relationship was more of a placeholder, something for now but not for forever, as these two both had much more memorable and well-suited pairings when it came to the world of comics matchmaking. And there's also that weird thing of, they don't really have much in common besides their work, so there's that. Number 9. Mary Jane Watson. I know, how could Mary Jane make the list again, you might wonder. You're like, Amanda, really, Mary Jane? Which Spider-Man is she paired with now that's so weird, you wonder? Well, once again, I am not talking about her relationship with Peter Parker, although if we really wanted to explore some of their alternate relationships from alternate Earths and some specific moments in their relationship, there are a few times that even those two have been weird together. But no, this time around we are talking about Mary Jane Watson and Spider-Woman Jessica Drew. When did this happen? Where did this happen? In the Ultimate Universe of Earth 1610. The two weren't ever officially together, but Jessica definitely had feelings for MJ as she shared the memories, thoughts, and emotions even of Peter Parker, who she was a clone of. Yeah, in Ultimates, Jessica Drew has a different origin story, and like Ben or Kane are on Earth 616, she herself is also a clone of Peter, just a female clone, who was created by Dr. Kurt Connors and Dr. Otto Octavius for the CIA and FBI. The weird thing was less that Jessica was attracted to MJ, and more that she was attracted to her because of Peter's memories. None of her memories were her own, because that's how cloning works in this reality apparently. And before we move on to our next spot, just a quick reminder to give this video a thumbs up if you haven't already and if you're enjoying it. Because yeah, weird things deserve likes, I think. Number 8. Carly Cooper. Carly ended up basically hating Spider-Man after being in a relationship with him, which was pretty unfortunate considering that she was a fan favorite when it came to her relationship with Peter. Carly was very patient with Peter initially and didn't even seem to mind when Peter would kinda zone out when they were together and not even notice when she left a gathering early, which is pretty awkward. She worked as a forensic specialist for the New York Police Department, so they seemed like a logical match. Both were brainy and involved in the fight for justice. However, when Peter Parker revealed that he was Spider-Man, Carly found herself unable to continue their relationship and the two broke up. However, Carly would still be haunted by this revelation and secret, which she fought very hard to protect. It eventually caused her to move away from New York for a time after a traumatic event where she found herself exposed to the Goblin formula and transformed, being given the name Monster and recruited into the Goblin King's Goblin Army. Carly was later cured, but this experience would definitely stay with her. Number 7. Elizabeth Tyne. Elizabeth Tyne was initially introduced by the name Janine Godby, which was an alias that she assumed to escape her past. The weird thing about this relationship wasn't so much how it unfolded, though being in a relationship with any clone of a superhero is always going to be weird, but more in how it started, and in Elizabeth's resemblance to another major love interest from Spider-Man comics, Mary Jane Watson. I specifically just want to focus on the weird interactions in the beginning of this relationship though, although it is weird that, you know, Ben Reilly's a clone and then Janine/Elizabeth just happens to resemble Mary Jane. That's pretty weird. Ben Reilly approached Janine initially and upon their first meeting was taken with her, asking her out in the most bizarre and kind of strangely movie-esque way. He's like, look, I know this is going to sound like a line, but well, I'm new in town. I know that's lame, but I swear it's true. It's just lame that you're using it as a line, Ben. So I'm new in town, and well, I was wondering if maybe we could have, I don't know, dinner tonight? And initially Janine just turns him down, and I think we can see why from that thing that he just said, which is a lot. I feel like Ben also got Peter's awkward charm as well in the cloning process. However, because it is charm, even though it is awkward, Janine immediately changes her mind because, yeah, awkward charm. Ben never makes it to their date, however, because hero stuff, but does run into Janine and apologizes and asks if they can try again. Now, she initially says no once more, and I actually love this one series of panels so much. I wish that they had just left it there because it's really funny, but she actually adds right after that he can take her to lunch right now. How spontaneous and romantic and kind of presumptuous, but okay. I also like that he's just alright, great, I wasn't doing anything. It's that's if that were me, I'd probably be well, maybe not now, but maybe in a bit. Number 6. Rogue. So this isn't main continuity Spider-Man or Rogue, but it's still a romantic moment that happened between the two characters, just on the Earth of 161. The two teamed up together in X-Men Forever 2. Rogue at the time had the guise of Nightcrawler, but still sports her very familiar brown and white hair. When Spider-Man encourages her to follow her heart, she warns him that she just might do that, sugar, and leans in to kiss him. I know what you're thinking, a kiss with Rogue could be deadly, but here Rogue was led to believe that she actually would be able to kiss Spider-Man without hurting him, so no worries there, don't panic. However, the romantic rooftop moment was then interrupted by Jean's telepathic shouts for Rogue's assistance. Those telepathic romance blocks, you know what I mean? Jean's help. Rogue's it's not a good time. Number 5. Deborah Whitman. This is an interesting relationship considering it was very one-sided. Deborah Whitman was a secretary at Empire State University where Peter was a student. She pined after Peter, and although at times it seemed like Peter didn't even notice her existence, the two started dating. Needless to say, they didn't make for a great partnership due to the fact that Peter kept having to bail on their dates to attend to heroic business as Spider-Man, but didn't really want to confide in Deborah, so he just gave her a ton of really lame excuses. Eventually, the two broke up, but Deborah remained obsessed with him and began to fantasize and hallucinate that he was Spider-Man, in essence making the ultimate excuse for his behavior while also idolizing him. When her therapist approached Peter after learning of this and asked him to wear a Spider-Man suit to help shock her out of her fantasy, he refused to do so, which obviously the therapist was like, well, that's weird, but okay. Deborah, becoming delusional, later ended up in a toxic relationship as a result of all of this, making excuses for her then husband. Fortunately, Peter did eventually confess to her that he was Spider-Man, which helped Deborah to move forward and woke her to the truth of her current relationship, motivating her to get a divorce. Thank goodness. Still pretty crazy. Number 4. Mary Jane Watson. Again. Another weird Spidey pairing with Mary Jane also comes to us from the Ultimates, because Spider-Man's clones all had his memories. They were just all basically into MJ. And not just Jessica. All the clones were meant to have their memories wiped so that they could develop their own identities and also be used in the process, but they escaped the facility where they were kept before this could happen. As a result, Kane, who also here sports an even creepier version of his half-melted face, ends up trapping Mary Jane and kidnapping her, claiming it's all out of love for her. Oh, if someone does that to you, you just need to get out of there. Seriously. Which is what MJ tries to do. She's like, no, let me out! Initially, she thinks that he's Peter from a silhouette, but then when she sees his face, she's horrified and knows something is definitely wrong, and this probably isn't her Peter Parker. Of course, she is right. Kane, out of love for MJ, wants to protect her by making her stronger. To do this, he exposes her to the Oz formula, which ends up turning her into a big red monster temporarily. Bet you thought I was going to say a big red dog, but no, that's Clifford. Fortunately, the real Peter Parker shows up and is able to use his presence to calm MJ down, transforming her back into a normal teenage girl. Well, normal. I mean, I feel like she just went through some stuff and she might transform again, but sort of normal. Mostly normal. Number 3. Louise Kennedy. The story of Louise Kennedy comes with a pretty powerful moral. Never date Kane Parker. Louise was a cop in Salt Lake City who had turned dirty and was on the criminal drug lord Vincent Tannen's payroll. She and Kane shared a night of passion, and both had feelings for the other. Both became this light in the darkness for one another, this hope that they could be redeemed or saved or become better. After Kane found out about Louise's betrayal, however, he ended up being forced to confront her and eventually killed her as a result. After snapping her neck, he left his mark on her, burning her face with the mark of Kane, shocking Ben Reilly, who was actually there to witness all of this, and whom he'd actually saved in killing Louise. It's a very terrible end to a relationship. Let me just burn your face after you're already dead. Number 2. Mia Flores. One of the most random when it comes to Peter's interactions with women. Mia Flores kissed Peter while he was out with Carly Cooper, Harry Osborn, and Lily Hollister. Like, she just randomly grabbed him and then kissed him. She didn't even introduce herself first. She's just like, I'm gonna kiss you. I'm like, oh my goodness. Peter did not sign up for that. This was all part of a ploy for Mia to basically get in with Harry's entourage, wanting to get closer to him. But the weird part of the whole interaction was just how stalkery Mia was acting during this whole thing. It was like she was out to kill. She was like, Peter, I'm coming for you in this club. And Peter, rather than just confront Mia and be like, I'm really not into you and no thank you, decided to, of course, jump out a window instead. Because that's how Peter Parker likes to solve problems sometimes. This was less of a relationship and more a weird attempt at a romantic and sexy moment from Mia, but it's just really awkward and strange, and I felt it was so weird that I needed to include it, even though it's not a full relationship. Technically. Number 1. Jessica Carradine. Remember that time Ben Reilly pined after the daughter of the man who murdered Uncle Ben? No? Well, take a seat, cause yeah, that happened. Jessica Carradine is the daughter of Dennis Carradine, the name that would later be given to the man who killed Peter Parker's Uncle Ben. She grew up with a hatred of Spider-Man, believing that the hero was actually to blame for the death of both Ben and her father. She believed that her dad was basically framed by Spidey. Needless to say, she and Ben's relationship is catastrophically ruined when she realizes that he is Spider-Man. I don't even know why Ben would go for this if he was aware of Jessica's name and her ties to the man who murdered Uncle Ben, but hey, I guess it wasn't technically his uncle since he's just Peter's clone. one of Peter's clones. It should be noted that Jessica did eventually come to terms with the fact that her father was actually the guilty party, but she still couldn't be with Ben because she was then just too worried for his safety, since he often puts himself in various dangerous situations as Spidey.
Number 10. Stopped a train with his body. In the second Spider-Man film starring Tobey Maguire, Spidey goes through some burnout after losing MJ to John Jameson and having his friendship with Harry Osborn fall apart. During this time, he's lost his spider powers, and he gets attacked by Doc Ock. After an intense battle, the Mad Doc leaves Spidey to rescue a rogue train heading off of the rails. Pete, having already taken off his mask, puts himself directly in the line of danger and is stretched to the point of nearly breaking in two as he gives everything he's got to stop the train. The effort leaves him battered, bruised, and barely conscious, and in a touching moment, the citizens of New York move him to safety and return his mask, swearing that they won't tell a soul. It's a touching tribute to Spider-Man's sacrifice, and it definitely looks pretty painful. Hey Nerd Squad, if you like these videos and you want to see more, take a second to hit that like button and ring that notification bell. We really appreciate it. Number 9. Got dragged off to fight in another dimension. This version of Peter Parker has it pretty rough. When he was a boy, his parents died in a car crash, and his Uncle Ben was highly abusive. In his anger, he adopts the name Charlie Parker instead of Peter. He's a problem child, and he spends 2 years in a juvenile detention center. By age 13, he's living on his own and using his abilities to steal from drug dealers. If that's not bad enough, he's later recruited into the Superior Spider Army, picked up by Ashley Barton, and dragged off to fight in an alternate universe where the Earth is irradiated, without so much as an introduction or an explanation. That it's like, let's go, no time to explain. This version of Spidey is pretty grumpy, and it's easy to see why. Regular Pete already has a hard time, but this guy got dealt a seriously crappy hand. Still, having spider powers does seem pretty awesome. Number 8. Got beaten to near death by the Phoenix Four. The Avengers vs. X-Men event was epic and mind-blowing, featuring some crazy showdowns between our favorite heroes. In A vs. X Volume 1 Part 7, Spider-Man plays a big role as he trains with Hope Summers, trying to help her learn how to control the Phoenix Force. As she grows frustrated that the fight is escalating and she hasn't been able to help, Spidey tries to reassure her that her time will come. Ironically, it's Spider-Man's time that comes later, as he covers the escape of his fellow Avengers by distracting those who are controlled by the Phoenix Force. Despite him having no chance, Spidey gets up again and again after he's beaten to a pulp, likely suffering multiple broken bones while rescuing his friends. It's a real display of heroic sacrifice from everyone's favorite wall crawler. Number 7. Became a heartless killer and died. Introduced in What If Spider-Man vs. Wolverine in 2008, Assassin Spider-Man is a serious dude. This version of Spidey becomes an assassin that works alongside Wolverine, which sounds super awesome and not like one of the worst things to ever happen to him. However, he eventually becomes kind of jaded, with no qualms about killing and just doing whatever it takes to get the job done. Worse still, this version of Pete doesn't even make any quips or crack jokes like the Spidey we know and love. He literally has a gun in his web shooters. He is eventually recruited into the Spider Army, but later he tragically dies. Still, not the worst thing to happen to Spider-Man. Number 6. Turned into a lizard beast and then died. In this universe, it was Gwen Stacy who was bitten and received spider powers, and the experience had a profound impact on Peter Parker. Pete idolized Spider-Woman and was desperate to be like her. So desperate in fact that he experimented on himself in a scene that goes horribly wrong, and he's transformed into a terrible lizard-like creature. He shows up in this form at the Midtown Senior Prom, where he does battle against Gwen. After a serious beatdown, Peter returns to his human form, but he still dies from his injuries. Being dead has probably got to be one of the worst things that's happened to Peter, but it's not as bad as all the suffering that some other versions of Spider-Man go through. Number 5. Became a werewolf. This version of Spidey appears in Marvel Zombies Army of Darkness Volume 1. He doesn't really have a large role or anything, but being transformed into a werewolf has got to be a new low for Spidey. In the comic, we see him with big old wolf ears and big hairy arms ripping out of his costume, and it is not lit. Can you imagine werewolf Spider-Man swinging through the moonlit sky chasing you down to eat you? Yikes. The werewolf web-slinger and his fellow superhero werewolves ravage the world and eat Galactus, later chasing after Ashley Williams when he appears in this universe. Number 4. Killed by Thanos. Is there anything worse than ceasing to exist? When Thanos performed his legendary snap with the Infinity Gauntlet, literally half the universe was wiped away, but I was too busy worrying about Spidey to even comprehend the destruction. Seeing Spider-Man disappear like dust on the big screen was seriously heart-wrenching for a lot of people, but it also spawned a generation of hilarious memes, perfectly balanced as all things should be. Luckily for us, these events are undone eventually, but man, there's nothing like seeing Spider-Man die to sober you up. Number 3. Became one of the 4 horsemen of apocalypse. This has actually happened to Spider-Man on 2 different occasions. Once in Cable and Deadpool number 15 in 2005, and then again in Avengers Volume 4. In these 2 stories, Apocalypse unleashes his master plan for world domination, which includes recruiting 4 people he finds fit to be his Horsemen of the Apocalypse. The 2010 version is especially horrifying, with Spidey being horribly mutated into this hairy white beast, seemingly fused to a horse-like creature that looks like it's made of webbing. Being used by evil bad guys is bad enough, but being turned into a hideous monster for that is definitely not Spider-Man's finest hour. Number 2. Been the last person alive on Earth. This version of Spider-Man is actually Ben Parker, in an alternate reality where he received spider powers when he accompanied his nephew Peter to a science demonstration and was bitten by a radioactive spider. Ben decided to use his powers to help others, but retired after his nemesis, the Emerald Elf, discovered his identity and killed his wife and Peter. Later on in life, Ben is approached by Ezekiel Sims, who warns him of the imminent arrival of Morlun, devourer of totems, on a mission to destroy all spider-folk. Ezekiel allows Ben to hide in his bunker under Sims' tower, and while he's there, the whole city of New York and presumably the world is subjected to nuclear destruction. He only emerges from the bunker later when the other spider totems arrive in the universe to enlist his help. He is reminded by the OG Spider-Man of his own advice about great responsibility, and he suits up one last time to help the Spider Army. It must have been really lonely just sitting around in that bunker though. Damn. And here we are at number 1. Turned into a zombie and ate Mary Jane and Aunt May. This one is just seriously messed up. So in this story, a zombie virus is infecting heroes like Luke Cage and Hawkeye, and eventually Spider-Man as well. After being bitten by Colonel America, Spidey takes a punch that dislocates his jaw, and then in this fight realizes the level of destruction happening all across the city. He realizes in the moment he's gonna have to go save Mary Jane and Aunt May, so he just bails, swings off to go and save them ASAP. Unfortunately, he does show up a little too late, and the zombie virus is already working its way through his body. When MJ approaches, he lashes out and bites her, and as she turns into a zombie, Pete sets to work on Aunt May. Ultimately, we are treated to this horrifying scene in which Spidey holds up Aunt May's severed head and screams at it.
Number 10, drugged and tortured. Classic. Those are 2 things you never want to happen to you, in that order either. Age of Ultron was an event that went down in 2013, and I gotta tell you, nothing is worse than waking up and realizing you slept past your alarm. You feel panicked, you feel all hot in your chest, you feel stupid, and you still feel tired. Worst of all, you don't even get any more rest. It's just stress and anxiety all in one ball. But how about sleeping through the end of the world? Yeah, that's right. That's exactly where Peter Parker's story begins in all of this Ultron madness. He wakes up and the world is in ruins. Desperate to help and find answers, he hits the streets, only to be drugged and kidnapped by Ultron's goons. He then waited, badly beaten, to be sold to Ultron. So it's bad, it's getting worse and worse. So after a daring rescue from Hawkeye, the team actually is frustrated with Hawkeye and Peter. Tony walks over to use some tech just to make sure he's alright, but in doing so could potentially compromise their secret location. Damn you, Tony even says to him. Sad. Imagine if Tony said damn you to you, you'd be like, oh, please. And before we go on to number 9, guys, if you could go ahead and toss us a thumbs up, because it really helps us out here at our studio. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for watching and supporting. Okay, back to some sad Spider-Man times. Number 9, Aunt May. This time a little bit different, but still the same. So with Miles Morales breaking the internet more and more every day with Spider-Man 3 rumors, and of course the Spider-Man Miles Morales game, it's fair to look back on the saddest part of that first PS4 game. Peter is faced with the ultimate hero scenario. If he uses the antidote to save Aunt May, there won't be enough to save everybody else from the Devil's Breath bioagent. And it's really well done. I mean, many gamers, including myself, definitely shed a tear at this point. My throat got tight. I was like, hey, skip, I don't want to see it.
What if we use it to cure someone right now?
Then there won't be enough to cure the others.
So when the game was being made, interestingly enough, the big ups didn't want them to kill Aunt May at first. But then once they saw the flow of the story and how things were playing out, they simply said, you can kill Aunt May, you've earned it.
You earned a pardon.
Number 8, Bike Messenger.
Why, Peter, you're bleeding.
Oh, yeah. I stepped off a curb and got clipped by one of those bike messengers.
Yeah, for sure, a bike messenger did that to your arm, not razor blades made by the Green Goblin. Yeah, so this dinner scene is anxiety central. Similar energy to when Michael Keaton's Vulture is grilling Peter on the way to the dance. Yeah, that injury is one of many in the Spider-Man trilogy, but it's the location of the injury that gets Peter in the most amounts of trouble. Right on his arm, front and center. It was this moment where Norman Osborn realizes that he's Spider-Man. If only you sat on his left, would have been smooth sailing. Come on, man, you have senses. Your right is my left, you gotta flip it. Here you go. Number 7, impaled from a glider. So in the movie, it's a well-timed backflip that ends up taking out Norman Osborn. And the best part is, Norman does that to himself. He's like, and then he goes, whoo, and gets it. It's awesome. His own glider kills him. What a life lesson right there. Don't be a dick. So stupid. Like no one's there, I'm like, sorry. Well, in the comics, it went down a little bit differently. See, Ben Reilly was a clone, of course, created by the Jackal and went by the name of the Scarlet Spider. And it was him who in fact got smoked by this glider, causing his death immediately afterwards, revealing that Ben Reilly is indeed the clone. Number 6, he loses a leg. I have a great arm and leg joke at the end of this one. Here we go. It took me an hour, I'm like, that's it. Peter Parker, this time from Earth 982, aka the MC2 universe. So after a battle with the Green Goblin, Peter ends up losing his entire left leg. So this happened about 2 years after the birth of his daughter, May, and the incident was so horrific for Peter that he quit. Yeah, he stopped being Spider-Man, which is sad. But then cut to many years later, May Parker grows up and puts on the suit herself. And she looks pretty badass. We love the MC2 universe. So while Peter is walking around with a fake leg and a cane, she's swinging around busting arms dealers. Too bad she didn't run into any legs dealers. Number 5, rocked. Okay, we've seen Thanos throw a moon at the Avengers. We've seen him snap away half of the Avengers and half of all living creatures, in fact. But hand to hand, the Mad Titan is still brutal. If you look back now on the Infinity Gauntlet event, this was a wild ride. I mean, Wolverine's bones turn into rubber, Cyclops gets smothered by a clear block, Iron Man gets his head cut off. It's violent, it's spicy. And then Spider-Man, we see him get a face full of rock. Yeah, Traxia straight up beats him to death and then finishes him with a rock. That's some like caveman stuff right there. I mean, at least Thanos made the deaths of the other Avengers somewhat quick. I mean, come on guys. I feel like if I had to pick one way to go with Thanos, I would much rather be turned into dust than having a rock here. This is already messed up enough, we don't want that. Number 4, he exploded. Yeah, so we touched on Marvel Zombies in part 2 or 3 or 1. We lose track here, okay? Spider-Man's had a rough go. But in Marvel Zombies Return, we see Spider-Man after he gets transported to another world. Classic. But this time, the field trip goes dark when Spider-Man realizes he's in the past. So there's a lot of zombie stuff on the up and up. So the zombie Spider-Man in this world ends up having some of Sandman's crew for lunch. So Sandman gets out of Dodge, right? But upon doing this, he bumps into the Spider-Man and he's like, oh, you again, you're not eating me, buddy. And then Sandman puts himself into Spider-Man's mouth, which is kind of like eating him, idiot. Which already, worst case scenario, to have that much sand in your mouth. And then to make things even worse, Sandman then grows and moves around until he explodes out of Spider-Man. Like a gender reveal balloon. It's like, pah, it's sand. Just kidding, it's sand.
Yeah. You made a delicious sandwich. So do you. Very crunchy.
Number 3, he was crucified. That's right, in X-Men issue 191, we see our boy Pete on the front panel with the words Raiders of the Lost Temple written at the top. See, this issue is a lot of fun for everybody, but of course, Spider-Man. The issue begins with the Avengers and the X-Men trapped in this world where Kulan Gath has made everything a little bit old-fashioned, like very old-fashioned. His spell turned cars into horse-drawn carriages. It turned guns into swords, which way more fun in my opinion, and police officers turn into civic guards. The whole city becomes medieval times. It's insane. Then Spider-Man gets crucified and tortured, even admitting that he didn't think it would be possible to hurt so much. And Gath's barely begun. Yeah, he was upset. Honestly, he was one issue away from Ramsay Bolton walking in and calling him Reek instead of Pete. Going for the Game of Thrones fans, there you go. Number 2, he dies. Again. Sometimes dying is just the way to go, especially if it's loud and heroic. Maybe you're like on your knees, you're yelling, you're ripping your shirt off or something cool, some kind of Dwayne The Rock Johnson way. You gotta do what you gotta do, even if that means dying alone with nobody to witness you being a badass. And that's exactly what happens in the story at the hands of Thanos. So once again, Thanos doesn't actually end the Spider's life in this issue. It's his own heroic actions that puts the nail in the coffin. He's going over the mental checklist of things to do. You know, classic Spidey things. Pick up Mary Jane, fill up on web fluid, deliver some mean-ass barbecue sauce to Aunt May's, the usual. And when a couple workers fall off the side of a building, Peter even acknowledges that it's another walk in the park for him. That is until the cooling machine explodes, sending Spider-Man hurling in the air. Now, seconds before his heart stops, he reflects on the fact that he always made jokes in dire times, then simply coming to realization that there are no more jokes. And crash, the barbecue sauce breaks off the ground as Spider-Man dies. Really sad, a weird barbecue sauce twist, but it actually made it seem more sad, I don't know. But it gets worse. Just wait, there's more bad. Death isn't the end, especially in Thanos' case. He meets Peter Parker and then makes him watch as the mother he tries to save yells in agony over the loss of her child. So not only did Spider-Man get himself killed trying to save the two, but he didn't even save the kid. Bad luck Brian over here, come on. Number 1. Let It Ring. Remember that song? It was great. Well, it's so good, man. Apple bottom jeans, boots with the fur. Alrighty, we'll finish off this list with one of my personal favorite moments of the Spider's horrible run with luck, maybe because I'm claustrophobic and this one triggered me. You've been warned. Spider-Man 300. There's a huge brawl with Venom and Spider-Man, and it's a lot of fun, right? A lot of webbing, a lot of punching and kicking and thwips. And at the beginning, Spider-Man is trying desperately to reach the Fantastic Four's Sonic Blaster, right? Just one little pew, and then we're good. Eddie Brock is doing his villain monologue stuff, and Spidey's like, yeah, keep talking, and he's trying to reach his blaster, and then Brock notices and slams him through the floor. Then Venom knocks him out and then Spider-Man wakes up upside down. Yeah, he's webbed up to this giant bell. So when the clock strikes midnight, that heavy clapper, it's gonna kill him. It's gonna get him right in the head. It's kind of like Saw in a way. It's really twisted. So in a last minute attempt, Peter barely manages to squeeze his hand out, stopping the bell from ringing. But of course, it's not easy. It's only time before the constant hitting will crush the bones in his hand. And he acknowledges this too. He knows that he's in a sticky situation. After barely escaping, the bell does finally ring. And if Peter sticks around, he too would die along with Venom. So even if you win, you lose. That's life. That's how life goes. Sometimes you're stuck between a bell and a hard place, literally. Kicking off the list at number 10, Buried by Kraven. In the storyline, Kraven's Last Hunt, published in 1987, it has quite an interesting illustration on its front page. We see a dark Spider-Man crawling out of a grave with the tombstone reading, "Here lies Spider-Man." Weird, what's going on? This 5-part series, of course, as you would guess, centers around the death of Spider-Man. So Kraven is frustrated after his failed attempts to catch Spider-Man, so he comes up with his plan and seemingly shoots him dead. So Kraven buries him, and even worse, he takes Spider-Man's suit and takes his place. So now, Kraven's roaming New York and brutally attacking criminals, including a group that was assaulting Mary Jane. So then 2 weeks later, Peter wakes up from the effects of the tranquilizer and digs himself out to freedom. Then when Spider-Man confronted Kraven, Kraven was like, "No way, buddy, I'm the real deal. I'm doing this hero gig now, not you. Get out of town. Beat it, mister." And Kraven releases Vermin, which is just a great character. So he attacks Peter thinking he was the same Spider-Man that had given him a beatdown before. So then Peter has to now convince Vermin otherwise. Vermin is actually about to kill Peter until Kraven intervenes. Talk about a bad couple of weeks. Yeesh. And before we continue this list, guys, if you haven't already, make sure you toss this video a thumbs up because it really helps us out here at the studio. You guys are the best. Thank you so much. Now back to Spider-Man's horrible life. Number 9. clones. The Clone Saga wasn't loved by fans. I mean, for starters, it actually lasted way too long. The Clone Saga began in 1994 and lasted until 1996, and it carried out through every single Spider-Man comic. So that entire time you were reading the issues, you were also forced to keep up with this dreadful clone plot that just wouldn't stop. And on top of that, there were these new characters and plots that were coming in every issue that it became almost a chore to retain interest. The story was set to end in Amazing Spider-Man 400 in 1995, but those early issues of the Clone Saga did so well with sales, so they decided to drag it on. One of the worst parts about all this was that fans had to find out that Ben Reilly was intended on being the real Spider-Man after all of this, and that Peter Parker we've been following for years was actually the clone. So naturally fans weren't having it, and they ended up retconning this again so that Peter was Spider-Man and Ben was still the clone. I mean, what a headache to explain, let alone be forced to read for years. And the worst part of the bunch being maximum clonage. This issue, that's when it goes the worst. So check it out, or don't. Number 8, best friend problems. It's always incredible to me when a superhero has a bully. Like, it always happens. And I mean, sure, it's a nice message to audience members not to be a bully. You know, you never know what battle somebody else is fighting at home. And it's usually a nice reveal. Like, Flash Thompson is more of a lighthearted bully in the new Spider-Man movies. He kind of looks up to Spider-Man, but he doesn't look to Peter Parker. It's a fun dynamic to play with. So when we meet Harry Osborn and see his arc, it's pretty wild. Harry initially wasn't a fan of Peter Parker in the first place. He thought he was a snob. But then he realized Peter's distance was actually due to his aunt's health problems, and the two of them ended up becoming good friends. In the 2002 Spider-Man film, we see the beginning of a best friend becoming the villain, and this time propelled by jealousy. And it was a nice relationship to see on screen. It added a lot to the film. We have James Franco playing Harry Osborn in the original trilogy, and by the time the third one rolls around, Harry is a full-on villain, sporting the new alter ego, the Green Goblin, taking the place, of course, of his father, Norman. Harry and his father's relationship was never easy breezy, even before Norman became a supervillain. So Peter was helping Harry get through problems with his father, and Spider-Man was fighting the Green Goblin. So we were treated to these layers of who knows what, and all these dynamic relationships playing in with each other. And it's what made the first Spider-Man movie so good. In the comics, when Peter and Norman finally figured out who each other really was, Norman suffered from amnesia after the fight. So Peter made up this story about how Norman was actually injured while he was helping Spider-Man fight the Green Goblin. Not a bad save. So Peter went to the hospital to check up on him, you know, see how things were going. And then Harry saw this as a sign that the two of them were friends. So sometimes your bestie gets close to you, sometimes they try and kill you with their dad's glider. You get what you got. And coming up at number 7, hit by a train. In Spider-Man Far From Home, we see Peter go toe-to-toe with Mysterio, a villain fans have been begging to see on the big screen for years. And Mysterio does a pretty good job convincing Peter that what he's seeing is real. But what Peter doesn't expect is a real-life train to hit him going really fast. There have actually been conversations online about how this hit should have killed Peter. He got hit by an Ice 3 bullet train, and one Reddit account went so far as to actually do the math on how Peter should have died with the speed and the momentum of the train. Also, that's a lot of effort. Just lie to us. Say he would have been fine. Don't tell us he would have died. Not only does this hit injure Peter, but once he slowly climbs onto the train and collapses, he's taken like almost 2,000 kilometers away to the Netherlands, where Happy has to pick him up in a field of tulips. This was a great part in the movie. I mean, seeing him lose everything and barely obtain the strength to go back and fight Mysterio again, you love to see it, we also hate to see it, you know? And number 6, extra arms. The Spider or the Man. In Amazing Spider-Man issue 100 back in 1963, the issue begins with Peter Parker wanting to dismiss his abilities. I mean, I'll take them. If you don't want them, just toss them this way. Thanks. So he comes up with a solution and takes a swig. For Gwen, he adds, before downing this mix. And as we could have guessed, it doesn't go well, because it's on this list. So by the last page of the issue, we see Peter as he ends up growing 4 extra arms. Not like this, he says. No, it's happening, buddy. So the next issue focuses on Peter as he tries to get a solution for this new, not so handy problem through Michael Morbius's blood. So with the new Morbius movie with Jared Leto coming out, could we possibly see Tom Holland sport the new 6-arm look? Part of me hopes not, but I mean, anything Tom Holland does is gold, so I'm here for it. And number 5. more girl problems. Peter and his human life alone could be a sitcom. In one trilogy, we have Mary Jane as the love life, and then in Garfield's movies, we have Gwen Stacy. How many girls does Spider-Man have in these comics? Well, that's a tricky question because Spider-Man and Peter Parker are very different people. They're perceived differently by others, specifically Black Cat. So Black Cat, being a known burglar, is met by Spider-Man in the night, and she knows he's at minimum attracted to her, right, physically. In Amazing Spider-Man issue 194, we see the two of them get pretty flirty and even exchange a kiss. But when Black Cat finds out who Spider-Man really is, she's less interested. You gotta play it cool, Pete. Play it cool. Keep the mask on. Less talking, more masking. And number 4, the deal with the devil. The One More Day storyline is next up on our list. This is a 4-issue story, but because of delays, it took 5 months to conclude. That's a lot of waiting. I mean, we're still waiting for the Black Widow movie to come out, so I mean, it's not too bad in comparison, but still, any wait sucks. The story began in 2007 in Amazing Spider-Man issue 544, and instead of the usual thugs or enhanced scientist villain, we see Spider-Man make a deal with the devil. The devil, of course, being Mephisto. So after Spider-Man revealed his identity in the Civil War storyline, people of course were after him, now knowing his true identity. So after a bullet strikes Aunt May instead of Peter, he of course feels like he's the one to blame. Even the opening of the story shows Aunt May in a hospital bed with Peter talking about how she was perfectly fine just a few days before. Like, it's dark right off the bat. So he first goes to Iron Man and gives him being the one who convinced Peter to reveal his identity in the first place. So he webs him up and gets all cool and bad cop. And it's nice to see, but it's also heartbreaking because that bullet was meant for him. Peter is feeling the guilt, and cue Mephisto. Yeah, the devil shows up and offers a deal to Peter while Aunt May is currently dying. So MJ adds to the pitch. So basically what happens is that the world will now forget about Peter's identity. Great. Aunt May will live. Neat. But the kicker is that MJ and Peter never got married. It's kind of like Shrek 4, except worse. So they hug one final time, and MJ explains that their love was always meant to be, and that whatever Mephisto does is unstoppable. And then poof, the deal is sealed. The next day, Peter's like, oh man, another uneventful night, just the way I like it, me being Peter Parker, not married, and all that jazz. And all the backstory just like that was wiped out at the turn of a page. Number 3, the death of Spider-Man. When a supervillain escapes, it's not a good time. Usually they're coming back for that person that put them there in the first place. Ultimate Spider-Man's death is absolutely beautiful and super saddening. It's done really well. So after tackling Captain America and literally taking a bullet for him, Peter is left to fight the Green Goblin and a few other bad apples that are out for revenge. And this entire climax happens in Peter's neighborhood. So everybody's watching. Everyone's running around trying to figure out what's going on, trying to get to safety, and he's limping around, tossing out quips, pulling off fire hydrants, and using Electro's current to like hurt everybody else. It's amazing. This is a plot that I think we'll actually see in the next Spider-Man movie in a way. So with all these villains now knowing Peter's true identity, we could get them all showing up to his house, just bringing the battle to him. Let's just hope it doesn't end the same way, with Peter's heroic demise, that is. Number 2, Curtis Connors. It's always fun giving one of your favorite teachers a hand in a project or something, but I mean, giving them a hand literally could end up pretty bad. In the comics, Dr. Kurt Connors lost his arm due to an explosion in a war and started to spend his life researching on new ways to grow it back. Hence the lizard growing the tail back thing. You got it. So once this finally happened, there were a few side effects. We see his arm grow back, but then as we see in the Amazing Spider-Man movie, Dr. Curtis Connors also becomes a full-on lizard. I mean, sure, lizards can grow their tails, but when you add that in with a human driven by rage and mixed DNA, the brain can alter as well. And his story arc begins with Amazing Spider-Man 6, and it's really cool. Especially if you've seen the movie, if you haven't quite read the comics, this is a nice little backstory that they didn't explain too much. And finally, number 1, he gave MJ cancer. You heard me. In Spider-Man Dark Reign, we learn a lot what Spider-Man's powers can do. The ability to climb walls, amazing. Shoot webs, ha, how fun. But when it comes to reproducing, his DNA might just be too problematic. The story takes place 30 years in the future in an alternate universe, Earth 70237. Peter ends up visiting the grave of MJ and discovers the real reason that she died. The radioactive cells in his sperm ended up giving MJ cancer. Yeah. That's what? Peter had the choice of staying with her when she was dying or attend gunshots outside as Spider-Man. He left her, and when he came back, she had already passed away. Super sad. This made Peter vow to never become Spider-Man again. It's a pretty dark story, and the whole giving MJ cancer thing, I mean, I hope we never have to relive that on the big screen ever. Not even anytime soon, just never in general. That would be great. Number 10, One Less Eye. That's right, kicking off the list at number 10, we have a Spider-Man moment that gives me Goosebumps every time I see it. We start now with Spider-Man, The Other, Evolve or Die, where we see Spider-Man get his eye ripped out. Yeah, Morlun put Spider-Man through quite the battle, but ultimately it ended with his eye being a midnight snack. Spider-Man even compared being hit by Morlun to being hit by the Incredible Hulk, saying how he's never been hit so hard in his life. He has no idea it's about to get so much worse. And before we continue, if you guys haven't done so already, please make sure to go ahead and give us a like, because it helps us out a bunch here at the studio. It's this one. Thanks a lot. Okay, now back to Peter Parker's awful life. Number 9, Man Spider. We've all wished at some point or another that we could have Spider-Man's powers. I mean, the wall crawling alone I would take. So useful. But what if you got more than you bargained for power-wise? Well, in Spider-Man Disassembled, we see this in a pretty gross way. Peter starts to become an actual spider, starting with growing an extra set of peepers. Yeah, so that's disgusting. But wait, there's more. He ends up becoming an actual spider. Yeah, so after being injected with this goop from the Spider Queen, not only does he grow some extra eyes, but he also gives birth to another Peter Parker. Yeah, you heard me correctly. So out comes Peter, and he's the same Peter Parker as before, but a little stronger, with maybe a hint of PTSD sprinkled in there. But that's not particularly new to Peter. Bonus points to Peter also for attending a wedding with the 2 extra eyes and not being noticed. Gotta love Star Trek themed weddings. Get away with everything. Number 8, Venom. Making its debut in Amazing Spider-Man 299, next up on the list we have the introduction of Venom. Venom is a symbiote from the Clintar race, and after making its way to Earth, it eventually wound up in the hands of course, Spider-Man. So this dark symbiote started to make Spider-Man's life better. I mean, he got a cool haircut, started standing up for himself, and the suit made him stronger. It just felt better. But this didn't last too long because the symbiote found its ideal host shortly after Peter ripped it off, and that being Edward Brock. Eddie had visited Our Lady of Saints Church to beg God for forgiveness before ending his own life. And then this alien symbiote bonded with him mentally and physically. Like I said, at this time Peter was there trying to get rid of the symbiote because it was doing more bad than good in his life. Now because it had originally bonded with Spider-Man, he basically is another Spider-Man, kind of. He gets the same powers Spidey used and also some of the same memories. It's actually why Eddie Brock knows Peter Parker is Spider-Man. Fun little fact. This ended up creating one of Spider-Man's best villains, and we get to see Tom Hardy reprise the role of Venom in the not so near future. Number 7, Tony Stark's death. With rumors swirling around about the next Spider-Man movie being one within the multiverse, it's only fair to go back and look at some of the sad themes of Spider-Man Far From Home, with of course being the death of Tony Stark. So right off the bat, we see Peter struggling with the weight of the world, having everybody look at him as the new leading Avenger. With most of our other Avengers off-world, Spider-Man facing Mysterio couldn't have been more grueling. This poor kid even gets slammed by a train at one point. It's easy to say this is a time where Peter could for sure go without. Reconnecting with lost friends, dealing with much older classmates like bad boy Brad, who doesn't make the first year back in school easy for Peter at all. That plus Tony Stark's inventory just being handed off to him, that's a lot of responsibility. The kid's going through a lot of pressure and puberty too. I mean, probably. What a combo. And number 6, the affair. Gwen and Norman's affair, to be specific. This is an absolute nightmare of an issue, so of course we're throwing it in here. We go now to Sins Past, which was this 5-part story that revealed that Gwen Stacy had actually had an affair with Norman Osborn. And they had kids named Gabriel and Sarah. So he meets them in a pretty wild way. We're introduced to these 2 twin characters, these new mysterious characters, and one of them really resembles Gwen Stacy, like by a lot. So Spider-Man 509, this begins, and it starts with a letter from a dead Gwen Stacy. So Peter starts to analyze the situation and the letter, and eventually finds out the secret that even Mary Jane knew about. So 7 months before Gwen's death, she gave birth to these twins with Norman. But because of Norman's blood, they aged a lot faster. And this wasn't taken too well by comic book fans, as this was written out pretty fast. Still an awful time for Peter, I'd say. I mean, even Mary Jane knew about it the whole time. So many secrets, so little time. Number 5, Doc Swap. This is a body swapping story that might make you pretty uncomfortable. So we go now to the Amazing Spider-Man 700, where we find a dying Dr. Otto Octavius. So Octavius switches bodies with Spider-Man, so that Spider-Man would die in his body and then he would live on inside the body of a superhero and do some good. Not a bad plan. Now the best part of this is that Peter was still inside, a little bit. He was able to remain inside the body and could only communicate with the new webhead, Otto Octavius. It's like your subconscious just talking to you the whole time. It was pretty neat to see this version of Spider-Man as well, and after a few minutes with the new, younger, healthier body, donned himself the new name, the Superior Spider-Man. And number 4, parents are back? Yeah, this one's pretty neat. So right off the cover of this, we see the text, "The most cataclysmic events of Spider-Man's life begins in this issue." And that's probably enough to pull you into the issue. I mean, come on. So we find out that Peter's parents have returned from the dead. So in the Amazing Spider-Man issue 365, we meet them again. Peter comes home and Aunt May's like, hey, I'm here with our new guests. And Peter's like, oh, new guests, those are always fun. Are those my parents? Yes, Peter's parents had returned from the dead. Well, rather they had never died to begin with. Let me explain. So they went on to explain how they were alive and working for Red Skull in secret for years. Only it was later revealed that they were evil androids the whole time. So his robo-parents were actually collecting some intel about Peter to give back to Chameleon. Chameleon created these fake parents for Green Goblin. So many lies. Just a web of lies. Spider-Man web of lies. Now we get it. And number 3. Gwen Stacy's death. This one left average moviegoers stunned in theaters when The Amazing Spider-Man 2 hit the big screen. We finally see the death of Gwen Stacy, and it's beautiful. So of course this comes from the comics, specifically in issue 121 of The Amazing Spider-Man. The Green Goblin ends up dropping her off the Brooklyn Bridge, and although Peter has his trusty webs, sometimes the angle just doesn't quite work out, and Gwen's neck ended up snapping from the momentum. So this happened in the movie as well, and Eagle Eye fans could spot the clock tower in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 striking 12:10, which references issue 121. And the way the web shot out like a hand too, I mean, really? Right in the heart. This scene's amazing. I mean, of course it's really sad, but the music, the way it's shot, really drives this part home. I mean, it's sad that this scene was one of the last ones we got from Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man run. Sure, the movies weren't as good as the new installments, but it would have been nice to see where this Spider-Man went after this dark moment. Would have been pretty dark. We'll never know. I mean, maybe multiverse stuff. We'll see. And number 2, identity not so secret. If you stuck around until the very end of Spider-Man Far From Home, you were treated to a pretty sweet teaser. So of course we see J.K. Simmons reprise his role of J. Jonah Jameson in what starts out as a pretty comical scene. Now of course we're happy to see him back in this Spider-Man universe, but he comes bearing bad news. He ends up showing leaked footage from the final battle with Mysterio, and in the footage we see him shout out Spider-Man by his secret identity, Peter Parker, and a nice little photo to go along with it too. Now this isn't the first time this has happened. Back in the comics before the Civil War storyline, Peter takes a page out of Tony's book and reveals his secret identity to the world. And after that, things go south quite fast, including a hired gun setting his aim on Aunt May. And finally, number 1, you guessed it, Uncle Ben's death. Of course we have to include this in the list and save it for last. We had to sit through this in theaters like numerous times. And that's for good reason. One of the biggest moments of Peter Parker's life was when his Uncle Ben died. Now, after letting a thug out of his sights, that thug ended up being the one to take his uncle's life. So not only did Peter of course feel saddened by this very close loss, especially not having parents to begin with, but he was responsible for letting this guy get away. He honestly let it happen, and then in Amazing Fantasy issue 15, we see it all unfold. So after a police officer asks Spider-Man why he let the crook get in an elevator and make a break for it, Spider-Man responds with, "Sorry pal, that's your job. I'm through being pushed around by anyone. From now on, I just look out for number 1, and that means me." And cut to bam.